Now, I am going to record this, and I'm going to go ahead and post this as well on Canvas. So if you want to take a look at this or go back and study it or use it when you're working on some of the questions, that's perfectly fine to do that. So first of all, the first thing I want to do is talk about just the standard form of the equation. So here we have y equals d plus a times sine, and then b times x minus c. Now, this could be sine or cosine. It kind of, everything is the same for both of those. It just depends on where the graph starts. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second here. So what does each parameter represent? Well, d is the middle, a is the amplitude, b is equal to 2 pi divided by the period, and then c is the shift left or right. Now, in order to find each of these pieces of information, the notes here explain what to do. So, in order to find the middle, all you do is you take the max plus the min and divide it by 2. Now, in this case, the max and the min would be 3 plus a negative 3 divided by 2, which would just be 0. To find the amplitude, you subtract them. So that'd be 3 minus a negative 3 divided by 2, which should be 6 divided by 2, which is going to be 3. So my amplitude is 3. The period is how long does it take the graph to repeat one cycle. Now, in this case, I would go from here to here. That's where it repeats one cycle. So it's going to go like that. Now, this is negative pi. This is positive 1 pi, and then this is another, so this would be 2 pi, and this one would be 3 pi. So if I started here and counted over, that's 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. So in this case, it takes 4 pi to repeat itself, so that would be the period. Now, as far as the phase shift depends on where you want to start the graph, whether it's sine or cosine. In this case, we can actually do several different graphs and say that there's several different shifts. Now, when you're doing this on your assignments, when you're doing these for the problems, what you want to do is just pick the easiest one possible. Now, some of them will have shifts and some of them won't. If they, excuse me, if possible, I would pick a starting point so that there's no shift. In this case, we would pick the starting point right here. Since it's in the middle, if you pick a point that starts in the middle, that means you're going to use sine. It's a positive sign if it goes up, negative sign if it goes down. When I say positive and negative sign, I'm talking about that sign right there. So since this is a plus, it would go up. Now, in this case, we start in the middle and we go up. So this would be a positive sign equation. Now, I'm just going to draw a couple of sketches. If you had an equation or a graph that looks something like this one here would be a negative sign because it starts in the middle and it goes down. In order to do a cosine, if it started up here and went down like this would be a positive cosine. And if it started at the bottom and went up like this would be a negative cosine. So that's kind of the difference between when you're going to use a positive and a negative and when you're going to use sine or cosine. So that's kind of a real quick kind of going through this. And you should have seen this before. We did this in chapter 4. But now what we're going to do is a specific question. So the gazelle population in Africa has been increasing and decreasing over time. Biologists have seen the population reach a low of 184 in 2006 and a high of 1,054 in 2010. So the first thing we're going to want to do is write an equation. In order to write an equation, I'm going to start off by doing my maps. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to find the middle. Remember, the middle is just the average. So we know we have a low of 184 and a high of 1054. So to find my middle, I'm going to add those together and divide by 2, and that will give me 619. So my middle is 619. To find my amplitude, I subtract them and divide by 2, and that will give me 435. So I have my middle, my amplitude, my period. Now, in order to find the period, I have to go one full cycle. Well, now it's starting at a low, so I'm going to start down here, and then it goes up to reach a maximum, and then it's going to come down back to a minimum. Now, I know my maximum value, I know my minimum value. Well, from the maximum to the minimum, that's only 1/2 of a period. Now, in this case, to find what that half of the period is, I'm just going to take 2010 and subtract 2006, because this is where 2006 is, this is where 2010 is. So it's going to take me 4 years to do half of a cycle. So if I multiply it by 2, that means my period is going to be 8 years. Now, for a shift, I'm going to say that there's no shift because I'm going to start at a minimum. That just means I have a negative cosine in my equation. So now I'm going to put it all together. So my equation will be y equals the middle, 619, minus, because I'm doing a minus cosine, 435 times the cosine. Now, the b value, remember, is equal to 2 pi over the period, so that's just going to be pi over 4, and then times x. So that's going to be my equation. Now, to answer the next two questions, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the equation. The first one says, what will the population of the gazelles be in 2022? So I have to figure out how many years that is from when we started. So I'm going to take 2022 and subtract 2006, and that's going to give me 16 years. So that's the number I'm going to put in place of x right there. So you have 619 minus 435 times the cosine of pi over 4 times 16. When you put that in your calculator, you're going to end up with about 184. Then the last thing, it says, in what 2 years will the population in what 2 years was the population 399 gazelles? So that means that I have to put 399 in place of y and then solve for x. So I'm going to start by subtracting 619. So that's going to give me a negative 220 is equal to a negative 435 times the cosine of pi over 4x. Divide by negative 435, and we end up with negative 220 over negative 435 is equal to the cosine of pi over 4x. Now, what I'm going to want to do here is I'm going to want to do the inverse cosine of both sides. So from there, I do the inverse cosine of negative 220 divided by negative 435, and that's equal to pi over 4x. Now, I'm going to divide by pi over 4, divide this by pi over 4. That cancels out, so that solves for x. When I put that all in my calculator, I'm going to end up with something like 1.325. Now, that's how many years it was that the population hit 399. So if we started in 2006 and I add 1.325, that will be 2007.325. But I just want to know the whole year. So in what year? Well, the first year is 2007. So that was the first year that happened. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, and I need to erase this to give myself a little more room, is I need to find the second answer. Well, to find the second answer when you're doing cosine, that's where you have to do 2 pi minus the inverse cosine part. So it's going to be 2 pi minus the inverse cosine of negative 220 divided by negative 435 is equal to pi over 4x. So again, divide by pi over 4 and divide this whole thing by pi over 4. Now, make sure when you do this that you do the top part first, get an answer, and then divide by pi over 4 and put the parentheses there. Now, when you do this, you're going to end up with an answer of about x equals 6.675. So again, if I started in 2006 and I add 6.675, that will be 2012.675. I don't want the point part, I just want to know what year it was, so that's 2012. Okay, so that kind of follows you through and brings you through a problem on how to do writing the equation when you're given a, excuse me, when you're given a word problem or when you're given a situation. The key to doing these questions is deciding what are you given to start with. In this case, I was given a min and a max. Sometimes you'll be given and if you are given a min and max, that's usually when you're going to use cosine. Sometimes you'll be given the average, which is also the middle, and that's usually when you're going to use sine. Okay.